Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Sue Onslow, who's the director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the School of Advanced Study of the University of London. Dr. Sue Onslow, the director of the Institute for Commonwealth Studies and reader at the University of London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so perhaps we can start with the comments made by Prince Charles at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting taking place in Rwanda. He expressed his sorrow and his pain for slavery. What do you think gave energy to these comments?
Thank you very much for that. I was very struck listening to the Prince's speech, and I've gone through his words carefully. He said, I want to acknowledge the roots of our contemporary association run deep into the most painful period of our history. I cannot describe the depths of my personal sorrow at the suffering of so many as I continue to deepen my own understanding at the slavery's enduring impact. Now, this was a very personal statement, but it was not a formal apology, and it didn't open the door for formal reparations. Now, the background to this, the increasingly contentious relations between Britain and, after all, we have the Crown as head of state, and Caribbean countries that still have the Queen as head of state. There are 15 across the world that do. So there have been tensions that have opened up, as I say, between Caribbean communities and the British government. There are multiple inputs into this in terms of increasing demand for reparations to address the economic underdevelopment that date back to the era of slavery, it could be said. These are long-rooted things. Then there is also the drive for republicanism and a feeling that Britain hasn't been listening to this. Now, the Prince's words this afternoon also addressed these very points, saying it's up to Commonwealth realm countries to make their own arrangements and that this can be settled without rancor. But the other issue that really pushed off this drive for republicanism and a shift away from having the British monarch as head of state was the Black Lives Matter movement that, of course, was accelerated, sparked by the death of George Floyd in the States. So all sorts of things coming together, and the British monarchy, as my colleague Professor Murphy at the University of London has pointed out, does well when there's consensus, but it struggles when political divisions have opened up. And Prince Charles's words were trying to achieve more consensus.
I think you might have given us some clues for my next question is the Commonwealth of Nations, as you've described, there's a long history. I wonder how it's changed over time and maybe what it means in the 21st century.
It's a very good question because there's often a muddle between in the public's mind between Commonwealth realms, countries that have got the Queen still as head of state, and the Commonwealth as a modern organisation. As this modern organisation, it had its roots in connections with British colonial rule, but it developed since 1952, or since 1949 particularly, through the 50s, into a very different organisation. Now a modern association that includes 3 members that don't have any connections with Britain's former colonial rule. And of course, Rwanda, which joined in 2009, is the most recent example of this. It's also evolved in terms of its emphasis. Since the 90s, it's shifted to democracy, good governance, and human rights. Of course, the Commonwealth has played a very important part in the global anti-apartheid struggle. But since 2013, there's been a shift to the importance of rights embedded in the Charter. There's a difference of opinion whether these are aspirations or whether it's a roadmap for all governments. So the Commonwealth has shifted then from being formerly what was an imperial club into a very different modern organisation with 54 member countries and growing. There's a waiting list.
Wow. Now, royal historian Ed Owens says that when Prince Charles takes over as at the British throne, he'll be inheriting a Commonwealth that is rapidly disintegrating, a disintegrating organisation, he described it. Is that your take?
I don't believe the Commonwealth is disintegrating. There have been, over the last 70 years, a number of times when people have said Commonwealth crisis, it's disintegrating. And yet the association continues to expand. It has certainly changed. It continues to evolve. Also, Prince Charles has not inherited it. I think that is also a misrepresentation. In 2018, the Queen indicated it was her sincere wish that Prince Charles should be the next ceremonial head of state, as ceremonial head of the Commonwealth, and heads endorsed this. It's not a hereditary position as the British monarch, as head in the ceremonial capacity for the Commonwealth.
All right, so it still has some life, according to you. What challenges then does it face to remain relevant in the modern day?
It faces a lot of challenges. Yes, I believe it has life, but I'm not going to minimize the challenges. It's got the challenge of it's only got limited funding. It's got the challenge of lack of visibility and perceived relevance to young people. We've got the Commonwealth Games coming up. In fact, at the end of, next month in Birmingham, which after all has a connectivity for young people, but the emotional ties that had helped to sustain the links within Commonwealth countries have become weaker, have become more tenuous. There is still the importance of an English-speaking network that doesn't have the United States. There is the importance of the role of civil society organizations that support rights, professional bodies. It's important because it gives voice and access to developmental and particularly small states. It's the only organization where they have a louder voice and better access. But I'm not going to minimize the challenges because I do think the Commonwealth is at a crossroads right now.
Talking about Commonwealth, President Kagame this week said that he wants the word Commonwealth to mean something, and that it's wealth not just common to a few of the 54 countries, calling, I guess, like the retired diplomat James Mugume said, that the developed nations in the Commonwealth perhaps need to find a way to contribute more to the developing nations. So as President Kagame says, nobody is left behind.
I agree with that statement. The principal funders of the Commonwealth are Australia, Canada, and Britain. But the funding towards the Commonwealth as an international organization has declined since 2013, when it was about 51 million, now down to below 26 million. Now, that's not a lot for an international bureaucracy that's supposed to put together programs. Commonwealth operates at different levels and in different ways in trying to boost trade relationships, in trying to support other aspects of employment, other aspects around climate change and climate justice. But yes, there does need to be a structural shift. I agree with that statement of President Paul Kagame about the need to address the pressing challenges of developing nations. I'm sorry that President Kagame, though, is not the first to have made that point about Commonwealth should mean Commonwealth. President Mahathir of Malaysia made that very point to me when I interviewed him.
Okay. Perhaps, a question that you might answer is the royal family. How is it regarded, being a ceremonial head of the Commonwealth? How is it regarded across the Commonwealth countries? I know that there are always large celebrations and parades and things like that. Do they remain still highly regarded and loved by countries across the Commonwealth?
This is a very live debate. Certainly when Queen Elizabeth II is no longer with us, the Commonwealth will change. And she has left very particular shoes to be filled. She has done a phenomenal amount for the Commonwealth. And the Queen is a beloved and very respected ceremonial head who has made it her favorite international organization to support. And she has been its most tireless champion. But in terms of what the debate is there about what will happen in the future, should the British monarch no longer be head? Should it be a rotating head? If so, how would it rotate? For how long? What about the potential politics of all of this? Who would pay for it? The advantage of having the British monarch as a ceremonial head of an international organization is that you haven't got into that, the challenges around succession planning, as it were. It attracts attention in the mainstream media. It attracts wider attention, and the hospitality comes for free for the Commonwealth, because who would pay for a ceremonial head of state, as a head of the Commonwealth, if it wasn't the British monarch? All of that would need to be sorted out before they move to the next phase.
Dr. Sue Onslow, Director of the Institute for Commonwealth Studies at the University of London. Thank you very, very much indeed for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Peter.